The intricate game of love and manipulation often blurs the line between them, leading people to cross them unwittingly. This is probably one of the earliest cases I have researched in the realm of true crime murder cases, dating back to the pre-World War I era. On the morning of March 2nd, 1917, the public was jolted by the news of a gruesome domestic violence incident. While the case seemed pretty ordinary at first, the perpetrator's past gradually revealed a disturbing obsession, transforming the incident from a mere act of violence into a game of fetish and manipulation. Before I start this case, I want you guys to make a note that this case is at least 100 years old. So we are talking about the time when there was no such thing as crime scene protocols, no forensic advancements, no computerized data, nothing. The details of the case are graphic, so listeners' discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Dhanvi, and today we are going to Japan again. On the morning of March 2nd, 1917, a man in his late 20s contacted a doctor, expressing concerns about his wife's deteriorating health and requesting urgent assistance. The doctor hurried to their residence and began examining the body of a young woman. As a medical professional, he was accustomed to treating severe injuries, but what he encountered left him shaken to his core. Spread out before him on a futon was the body of 23-year-old Yone Yahagi, shrouded by a blanket. As soon as he lifted the covering, he was appalled by the shocking state in which he found her. Yone had burns and scars all over her body. Some of them were fresh, while others were old. Her fingers and toes had been amputated. The doctor asked Suekichi about the wounds and how they happened, but he remained silent. He could deduce that the wounds were not caused naturally, nor were they caused due to an accident. The doctor decided to treat the young lady first before asking any other questions, and by the time he was done, he knew he had to call the police. The state in which Yone was found easily indicated that she was in grave danger. The police apprehended Suekichi, who stood by his innocence and denied any wrongdoings against Yone. While being taken into custody, law enforcement officers searched his entire house and found a small sword and a gimlet, among other objects, suggestive of their use as a weapon to inflict harm on Yone. On the 4th of March, 2 days after Yone's discovery, she succumbed to her injuries. With her body in their possession, the police were in a position to proceed with a thorough investigation and perform an autopsy. The results of the autopsy left the media stunned. It was revealed in the autopsy that Yone had sustained between 22 to 23 scars throughout her body, with 3 wounds on each side of her groin. Additionally, she was missing 3 toes and 2 fingers, having lost her 4th toe on her left foot and her 2nd and pinky toe on her right foot. Her left hand were also missing her 4th and pinky finger, which were amputated at the 2nd joint. And that's not all. The statement, Okuchi Suekichi's wife, was engraved on her back and right arm. It was pretty clear that Suekichi had brutally abused and murdered his wife. The police had ample evidence to arrest him on these charges and were prepared to detain him indefinitely. The media and the public had already pronounced him guilty of the crime. However, if that were the end of the story, the episode should end now, right? Not really. Yomiuri Shimbun, an esteemed daily newspaper established in 1874, published an article related to the case. The article was quick to conclude that Suekichi was consumed by a madness of jealousy, which drove him to commit unspeakable acts against his wife. The article states, Quote, Suekichi is a cruel and jealous by nature, and every time he remembered Yone's past, he would get his anger out on her. He would bind her limbs with thin cords, gag her with towels, and use a knife on her exposed skin. He started by amputating her big toes and even label her as his wife. He would brand her with burned tongs as Suekichi Oguchi's wife. He was so violent that Yone was living an eternal hell until her death. Unquote. As the investigation progressed, a startling revelation turned the case on its head. Suekichi's confession shattered the carefully constructed timeline and evidence gathered by the police, with his claims that Yone had compelled him to commit such heinous acts. Suekichi and Yone met each other 4 years before this entire ordeal went down in Asakusa district of Tokyo. It was February of 1913, where Suekichi ran an oden stand and Yone worked as a maid. In Japanese societies, maids have long been an integral part of the culture. Currently, when visiting Japan, one can find plethora of maid cafes, also known as cosplay restaurants, where maids cater to your needs. However, back in 1913, maids were in high demand. A well-off family in Japan during that era was expected to have at least 2 maids, and possessing maids was more of a status symbol. I am uncertain of the exact nature of Yone's employment. After researching the articles, it was apparent that she was employed as a maid. However, there was no indication of her place of work or employer. Furthermore, one article suggested that she may have worked as a prostitute in addition to her role as a maid, utilizing the same costume and title interchangeably. In any case, it was Yone who took the first step and approached Suekichi, but he ignored her advances. To further complicate matters, Suekichi was already married and had a child. But Yone persisted in pursuing him relentlessly. He ultimately relented and decided to abandon his wife and child to be with Yone, hoping for a lifetime relationship with her. Yone invited him to stay in a hotel or an inn where they slept together. Suekichi felt remorseful for staying with her because he already had a wife. But after spending numerous nights sleeping with her and being with her, he forgot about everything. It was December 1913 when they decided to rent a room at a general store at Imado-cho and started living there. Not long after, Suekichi found that Yone was having an affair with their neighbor who lived right next door. I don't have a name for him, but from what I read, he was said to be a very cruel and violent when he was with Yone, which helped Yone discover her masochistic tendencies as she enjoyed that pain and suffering, and so she wanted to experience it often and often. To rid Yone of the abusive neighbor, Suekichi paid a large sum of money and naively thought that he did Yone a favor by saving her from such a cruel man. There was no change in Yone's behavior as she continued to sleep with various men and ask for forgiveness from Suekichi every time, apologizing for committing such a sin. This pattern persisted even after they moved to different cities and Yone continued to seek out other partners rather than being with Suekichi. After her death, it was widely speculated in media and among the public that whatever Suekichi did, it was an act of punishment for Yone being unfaithful to him. But as I mentioned before, everything changed when Suekichi began to speak. He stated that whatever he did it because Yone asked him to. Whenever Suekichi denied causing her that pain, she would threaten to leave him. And knowing how much Suekichi valued Yone in his life, he gave in every time. He never wanted to lose her, so he complied with all the demands she made. As per the coroner's report, Yone's demise was caused by the injuries inflicted upon her. However, the report also pointed out that there were no signs of defensive wounds on her body, despite the wounds on her groin being lined up with precision. This suggested that she made no effort to defend herself, despite several opportunities to do so. Yone was not restrained or confined to the house and could have easily reported the abuse to someone. Yet she never spoke out, even as the situation deteriorated. Moreover, there were no visible signs on Suekichi's body indicating that she had not fought back. The absence of rope marks on her wrists and ankles also ruled out the possibility of her being bound. Once Suekichi confessed to causing her harm willingly, police began delving into their respective backgrounds. After spending their time researching the two of them, it was clear that Yone was the dominating figure in the relationship. It may not be accurate to describe their relationship as that, but it was clear that Yone managed to manipulate Suekichi every time she would make a mistake. In February 1917, a month before Suekichi's desperate plea for help, Yone made an unusual request to her husband. She asked him to brand her with a mark indicating that she belonged to him and would never be tempted by any other man. So, with heated tongs, Suekichi complied and imprinted Oguchi Suekichi's wife on her back. But this wasn't enough for Yone, as she demanded that Suekichi should imprint her again using the same words on her arm so that she could see it, and then once again for the third time because she could not see that mark on her arm when she fell asleep. Despite the obvious red flags, Suekichi foolishly accepted his wife's wishes and branded her yet again on her right arm. According to Suekichi, Yone never voiced any objections about the injuries he inflicted upon her, even when he burned her with hot tongs and gagged her mouth with a towel. She remained silent. She went so far as to express that the pain he inflicted felt more soothing than moxibustion or Chinese acupuncture. When asked about those 3 missing toes and 2 fingers, Suekichi admitted that Yone asked him to cut those off her hands. He tried to argue with her, saying that her right hand was the prominent one. But that didn't stop her. She decided to take matters in her own hand, placed her hand on a cutting board, and started trying to amputate her finger. But it did not work ultimately. So she begged Suekichi to do it for her. And so he did. He took a hammer and a saw, placed the finger beneath the saw, and brought the hammer down on it, amputating the finger. Suekichi denied doing the same to the toes though. By now, because of all her wounds, there was a rancid smell around her, as her wounds were infected due to the lack of treatment, and she had stopped visiting the local bathhouse. Now, a bathhouse is a communal facility where both men and women can cleanse themselves. Due to the lack of bathrooms in many households, people frequently visited these to clean themselves and relax. Yone was fine, by the way. She was not worried about the pain at all. She asked Suekichi to start cutting her thighs next. She again threatened him, this time stating that if he decided not to do it, that would mean that he doesn't want to stay with her anymore. This would repeat till 2nd March 1917, when Suekichi would finally call the doctor to help Yone. And after all the pastoring, the begging, the pain and the suffering, Yone ultimately died 2 days after the first call was made to the doctor. Despite her departure, Suekichi was still not on clear ground. Even if he did conduct those actions at someone else's command, he was still guilty of causing harm to Yone, which ultimately caused her death. The entire story, from Suekichi's point of view, was enough to close the investigation. Whatever Suekichi did, the police and public found it hard to believe. There were no discrepancies or contradictions found in his statement, leading to him being charged with manslaughter instead of murder. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, he was never convicted, because on 23rd December 1918, Suekichi died of a cerebral hemorrhage or brain bleed before the verdict even came out. The timeline of the study is unclear, but a renowned sexologist, Tetsuo Takahashi, claimed that Yone did not start as a masochist. She liked how her unsatisfied desires were satisfied with violent masochism, and maybe she found joy annoying Suekichi also. By hurting and getting hurt physically, the two confirmed their love for each other. And maybe that's the reason why Yone and Suekichi's act of love escalated. Another psychological evaluation concluded that Suekichi was stubborn and deficient in judgment. Hence his willingness to comply with Yone's requests without firmly rejecting them. To be very honest, I thought of this case as a decent murder mystery, but I was wrong. Yone's crafty tactics and Suekichi's naivety left me feeling annoyed and agitated at times. It is difficult not to wonder if Suekichi could have avoided his fate had he recognized the toxicity of the relationship and stood up against Yone's demands and spared both their lives. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shades of Macabre. If you want to hear more about true crime stories, be sure to subscribe to our podcast wherever you're listening. You can also find images related to the cases covered on the podcast on our Instagram at Shades of Macabre. Follow us on social media to receive updates on other episodes and let us know if there's a case you want us to cover. Shades of Macabre will be back next week. Till then, take care and be safe.